The story you are about to hear delves into the complex nuances of infidelity and its consequences on the lives of ordinary people. Take a look into the life of Clark, whose fate becomes intertwined with romantic and intriguing twists, starting from the moment he learns of his wife's betrayal. And then a light bulb went on above my head, as it does in cartoons when a character gets an idea or an answer to a question. Heck, my third child wasn't really mine, she was another man's biological daughter. I was on the phone with a genealogygurus.com representative, figuring out why my daughter's DNA test had not been processed after 10 weeks. I gave her the test as an extra Christmas gift and gave the representative the appropriate numbers so they could track it down. After about a 5-minute wait, he came back on the line and assured me that the test had been processed. Also, this was a confidentiality issue between the company and the person who actually took the test, and he could not provide me with any additional information. But if you processed it, why doesn't it show up on my DNA evidence? Excitedly, I asked. Sir, there are several reasons why your daughter may not show up on your DNA evidence, but I am not at liberty to discuss this particular test with you, he replied in a somewhat irritated tone. And that's when the light bulb went off. Obviously, the number one reason she doesn't show up in my matches is because she doesn't fit. I ended the call in a daze. I remember hitting the red end call button, and then I started crying. I woke up a few minutes later, curled up on the couch in the family room. I still had 15 minutes left before my lunch break, so I called my daughter, who was probably on her lunch break too since she worked in the same time zone as me. I know she usually eats lunch curled up with a book at her desk, so I wasn't worried about disturbing her. She picked up the phone on the first ring. "Hi, Daddy, how are you?" she said, somewhat wearily. "Pumpkin, you know I love you and trust you completely, but I know what's going on with the DNA test," I bluffed. "I called genealogy teachers and was told it was processed about 2 weeks ago." There was the sound of air being sucked in from her side, and then silence for at least 10 seconds. "I know, Dad, we need to talk, but I can't do it here and now. Call me tonight and don't be in the room with Mom when you call." I was a blur as I drove back to the office, and I have to admit that I didn't provide my boss with a productive afternoon at the engineering firm where I worked. There were so many things swirling around in my head, so many questions, and the thought that my little girl was not my little girl. Being analytical by nature, I knew I had to prioritize and then tackle problems one at a time. I was VP of engineering at Sakeo Electronics for a reason, and at this point, I knew that the best thing for me to do was to treat my personal problems as project problems and address them in an orderly fashion. The old man, Dwayne Scapis, taught me that himself when he hired me straight out of Purdue University to work for his then fledgling company. With Dwayne at the helm and me never far from his right hand, Scapis grew into an industry leader, and we both made significant profits. I made great money, had great benefits, and worked with wonderful, witty people. And when I came home in the evening, there was a beautiful, sexy wife and 3 wonderful children waiting for me. Eventually, the kids grew up, left home, got married, and had children of their own. It was a little lonely in the house at first, but we found lots of things to do, and I think the loneliness revitalized us as a couple again. But as I thought back over the last month of my life, I noticed a few small incidents, including Marissa's phone call to my wife about 2 weeks ago. On Tuesday night, we were both sitting in the family room watching TV when Tracy's phone rang. She looked at it and said it was Mar, and then answered it. The conversation went on for about 5 minutes. Tracy answered with almost only yes and no, and I could see tears welling up in the corners of her eyes when she hung up. I asked if everything was okay, and she said Marissa's cat had some health problems. "No big deal," she said, though I noticed she was a little nervous around me. I thought it was a little strange that she was taking Marissa's cat's health so personally. That must have been when Marissa found out about it. Tracy didn't know I sent Marissa the test. I didn't think it was noteworthy. Marissa was the only one of the 3 kids who had any interest in genealogy, so I bought a kit online and sent it to her. I've been researching my family roots for years on end, and I really liked the DNA test part. I thought Marissa would take the test with gusto. Obviously, I was wrong. When I got home, I tried my best not to act any differently with Tracy, even though I was seething inside. Work on one problem at a time, I repeated to myself. I met Tracy at Purdue my sophomore year. We didn't meet until my senior year, but we've been inseparable ever since, or so it seemed to me. We married a year after graduating from college, 31 years ago, and to this day, I would tell anyone that it was the best decision of my life. She is still beautiful in her 54 years, and despite having 3 children, she exercises regularly and has the body of a woman in her 30s. She's fun and funny, and until today, I looked forward to spending the rest of my life with her. Around 8, I told Tracy that I needed to call the old man about a project we were working on and left the room. I actually took my jacket and went outside to the porch swing so I could talk without fear of Tracy hearing, and then I called Marissa. Marissa answered on the first ring, and her voice was completely distraught. "I'm sorry, Dad. I know I should have told you sooner, but Mom asked that I not say anything until she had a chance to talk to you," she whispered before I could say hello. "I'm not mad at you. Calm down," I said as soothingly as I could. "I'm not accusing you of anything. You're just as much a victim as I am." I could hear her breathing heavily on the phone. I knew it was killing her. "Ree, I want you to know that this doesn't change anything between us. I'm still your father, and you're still my pumpkin. I've always given you kids all my love, and after all this time, I'm not going to stop now, unless you want me to stop." At this point, she fell apart and sobbed almost incoherently into the phone. "I love you, Daddy. I don't need anyone but you. This is my pumpkin. Look, I don't want to put you on the spot, but you're my best source of DNA information. We won't discuss other things so you don't get caught up in the middle of things, but I need to know if you've had a DNA match." "Yes, Daddy, that's right," she sighed. Amanda Anderson turned out to be my half-sister, Mandy, Uncle George, and Aunt Jenny's Mandy. "Oh, holy. I'm sorry, Daddy," she said quietly. "It's not your fault, Pumpkin. You don't need to apologize to me ever," I said as calmly as I could. That meant that George Anderson, Uncle George to my kids, appeals court judge George Anderson to the rest of the world, was Marissa's biological father. Damn. This meant that my wife slept with her boss when he was an attorney at the law firm of Gee Howe and Associates. That meant at least 25 years ago, considering Marissa was 24 years old. Tracy had been his administrator at the time. He'd left the firm to become a state judge a few years later, moving to the state capitol before his career really took off. For her part, Tracy did not pursue a relationship with George, preferring to stay at Gee Howe and eventually taking the position of office manager. But in the few years that George and Tracy worked together, he and his wife, Jenny, became such good friends that our children still call them Uncle and Auntie, and their children call me and Tracy the same. And a few times when I was away on a business trip, Tracy and the kids would visit George and Jenny for a few days at their lake house. Oh crap. The kids even talked a few times about Aunt Jenny taking them here and there. Neither Uncle George nor Mom went with them, and I never even gave it a second thought. Damn it, I must have been distracted at that moment because I heard Marissa call out to me, "Daddy. Daddy. I'm sorry, Pumpkin." I got lost in my thoughts. "Thanks for your help, babe. Say hi to Drew." "Wait a minute, Dad, what are you going to do?" It was a legitimate question, but I didn't have a good answer, so I just told her the truth. "I'm not sure, kid." "Well, don't do anything incredibly stupid, Dad. A little foolishness is okay, but don't get arrested or anything." I hadn't thought about shooting Tracy until that moment, but I had promised Marissa that I wouldn't be arrested, so I guess that ruled out the possibility of shooting. I don't break promises to my kids, ever. Calming Marissa down about our relationship was my number one task, and finding out who Tracy's partner in crime was my second task. Task number 3 was to start divorce proceedings after I found a new lawyer, because my current lawyer belongs to the firm Tracy works for. This, of course, was not to be done until after I had a good sit-down with the lawyer. I would have to deal with the soon-to-be ex-Mrs. Clark Walters. It was chilly at home when we were together. Tracy chatted like a magpie. Nerves, I suppose. She seemed to try her hardest to make me happy, figuring it would lessen the repercussions when I found out. I don't know, but there was definitely distance between us, and she wasn't about to break the ice. About a week later, I met with one attorney, and when he found out that my wife worked as an office manager at GUI How, he got a very nervous look on his face. So I moved on to the next attorney on my list, a 20-something woman who just smiled when I mentioned that Tracy was the office manager at GUI How. This was who I was looking for, someone who wouldn't be intimidated when one of the big GUI attorneys acted as my wife's representative. I laid out what little I knew about the cheating scenario, starting, of course, with learning that my youngest child was not biologically mine and finding out that she was Judge Anderson's child, Court of Appeals Judge Anderson. My attorney, one Marie Robinette, asked, "Same thing?" I replied, watching her face to see if I needed to find another lawyer. "It must be good," she said in response, and we started discussing financials. Since we both had good jobs, pensions, and benefits, Marie suggested that we split the joint property in half, keep our pensions, and sell the house. This would leave us both well off, although I would be in a slightly better position because I would have more income and a better pension. Unless you really want to crush her over infidelity, a child, or a general lack of respect, she quickly added, taking a moment to indicate that she might jump up on the conference table to try and right the wrongs done to me. "We'll have our payback of that, I'm sure, but I don't want to hurt her financially," I replied. "What about the judge? Are we going to prosecute him for anything? Because if so, it's going to be much more difficult and will increase your score considerably." "The judge is my problem, and I'll deal with it as I see fit," I snapped back, perhaps too harshly. "Got it," she replied. "If she doesn't fight, it could be 6 months," Marie remarked. "If she does fight, however, we could be talking more than a year." "I don't have any dates set up yet, so take your time and do it right," I told her. The third task was behind us. Now it was time for the fourth, the showdown. I waited another week just to see if Tracy's head would explode. In that time, Saturday night was our usual date night. Then we'd come home, watch a movie, and make love. But Saturday night sex was always special. We hadn't gone on a date in 2 weeks, and we hadn't had sex in the same amount of time because I just couldn't bring myself to do it after I found out about the affair. Marissa didn't even question it, another sign that she knew I was aware, but she was very good at pretending. However, there was an end to that. I took her out to a nice French restaurant. We shared a bottle of wine and even had some great desserts. She was happier than I'd seen her in weeks. And when we got home, I carefully removed her coat, led her to the kitchen table, pulled out a chair for her, and said those famous words, "We need to talk." Tracy sort of half smiled as I poured myself a Jack Daniels on the rocks and offered her something from the liquor cabinet, which she delicately declined. I set my drink on the table, looked her straight in the eye, and said, "The floor is all yours." That was a long time ago, Clark. George and I haven't slept together in about 20 years. Can't we just chalk it up as a mistake from a long time ago and leave it at that? I have to admit I was glad she didn't go out of her way to say the DNA test was wrong, but to try to brush it off by saying it was so long ago it didn't matter anymore. Really? So the last time you had sex together was about 20 years ago. When did you start having sex, how often, and why did you eventually stop? I need all of that. But first of all, I need to know if baby number 1 and baby number 2 are also his. No, Clark. Barry and Katie are yours. I didn't even sleep with George until about a year after Katie was born. Our affair lasted about 3 years at first and then stopped when George decided to leave the firm and move up the judicial ladder. He waited about a year after we broke up to take his first judicial position because he wanted to make sure the background check would show he was clean. And after that, we only made love a few times at the lake house when Jenny innocently took all the kids out for an afternoon of fun. Jenny didn't know anything at the time either, but George eventually told her. And later, the three of us had a peace meeting where both George and I promised her that there would be no more sex. Why didn't you ever tell me that and try to have a peaceful powwow with me? What am I, a freaking liver? I asked sharply. Tracy wiped her hands on her sleeves and replied, I knew I could never tell you. You would divorce me in a heartbeat, and I certainly didn't want that. I loved you, and I still do. You just apparently love George more. I was your backup. No, Clark, I love you with all my heart, she pleaded. No, you loved him with all your heart. You loved him so much that you gave him up so he could realize his career dream while knowing I was your backup plan. You may have loved me to some degree, but you knew I goddamn worshipped the ground you walk on and counted on that and our family to help you through his loss, I asserted. Tracy dropped her eyes to her knees. The truth hurt, and I knew I'd hit the mark. What about Marissa? Obviously, he was dabbling with you, and you should have known where that could lead, and did. I just figured that since you both had brown hair, brown eyes, and fair skin, no one would ever guess whose baby it was, and I knew you'd have no reason to think she wasn't yours. So when she turned out to look like me anyway, I didn't have to worry about it until you sent her that damn DNA test. Honestly, I didn't know anything before that. So it's my fault? I asked incredulously. No, George and I discussed the possibility, but I told him he needn't worry since you two look alike. For all I know, he didn't know either, but I'm sure Mandy has already brought him up to speed. I haven't heard from him in at least a couple of years, not since they were at Marissa and Drew's wedding 2 years ago. No matter who knows what, Marissa is still mine, and that's what I told her. I'm on the birth certificate, I raised her, I love her. She's mine. George better not think about it, and if he calls, you better tell him that. And by the way, I'm going to have the other 2 children DNA tested as soon as possible. I need to know that for my own peace of mind. Clark, I told you they were yours. And you expect me to trust you? Why? I snapped back. Like everything else, Tracy was completely stunned by my newfound distrust. What the hell did she expect? But I knew she was also greatly disturbed that I would tell the other 2 kids about her infidelity. No one wants to look like a fool in front of their own children. So, how often have you 2 been doing this, and where? Finish the story, at least for me, I quipped. We didn't plan it, Clark, it just happened that way. We spent so much time together working, and then we became friends, and it grew into something more. He was kind, considerate, witty, funny, passionate, you know the man. And we connected on a deeper level. But because we had spouses we both loved, we kept things to a minimum and moved our meeting places, usually out of town. No, we never met here or at his house. That would have been wrong on several levels. But that didn't stop the 2 of you from shagging a few times at the lake house after the affair supposedly ended while Jenny was out with the kids, I pondered aloud. No, we haven't, she practically whispered to me. But I swear to you, we haven't had intimacy since, and Jenny knows about all of this and has forgiven you both, I asked, shaking my head in bewilderment. Yes, I told you. I don't think I can, I whispered, and there was undisguised excitement in my voice. We know what we did was wrong, Clark, but it's been over for 20 years, and you never suffered through it while it was all happening. So can't we just go back to where we were a few weeks ago? You were my loving husband, I was your loving wife. Nothing has to change, Tracy pleaded. But things have already changed, Tracy, I said. I've spent the better part of 3 weeks wondering what I did wrong, that you fell in love with another man, and wondering if I could never fully trust you again, let alone trust you enough to stay married to you. I gave you my heart completely, and you put it in your pocket and took it out when it suited you. It wasn't supposed to be a marriage of convenience, it was supposed to be a marriage of total commitment, of love. At this point, Tracy started crying. I hate it when she does that, and I usually try to calm her down, but this time was different. I went into the family room and turned on the TV, leaving her at the kitchen table. We slept in the same bed that night, but for the first time in a while, we didn't snuggle against each other. I moved as far away from her as I could on the double bed and didn't let her slide into me when she climbed in. Her face reflected shock and pain, but I didn't care. Tracy made us a nice breakfast Sunday morning, and while we were eating, I brought up the subject of divorce. The affair was over 20 years ago. You didn't even know about it, for God's sake. It's over now, let's just move on, she practically yelled at me. A mistake remains a mistake, no matter how long ago it was, I shouted back at her. You deceived me, you lied to me, you cheated on me, and violated my trust. These are not temporary problems. I got up from the table, leaving half my plate of food behind, and went outside to mow the lawn. That was the last conversation I had with Tracy until Wednesday afternoon when she informed me that Jenny Anderson would be joining us next weekend. Needless to say, I wasn't thrilled, but Jenny was an old dear friend and had endured the same cheating that I had, so I figured I should have a chat with her. Jenny showed up Friday night at 6 o'clock, having traveled 2 hours from her house. She hadn't brought George with her. Tracy made stuffed flank steak with mashed potatoes, and I brought a couple of bottles of Merlot to go along with it. Conversation was light and friendly during dinner, and then we retired to the family room with glasses of wine. I assumed to get down to the main event. Jenny began to talk about the affair as a historical subject, very sterile and calm, but as she spoke further, her emotions grew stronger, and tears came to her and Tracy's eyes. When George told me about the affair, I assumed it was over years ago, and he promised me it wouldn't happen again, Jenny said. I'll admit I was devastated at first, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized that since it was over before I even knew about it, I guess I wasn't hurt too badly. And since I knew that Jenny wasn't some gold digger, I realized how it could have happened. George's personality is kind of addictive, isn't it? Although I didn't know about Marissa until a few weeks ago when everyone found out about it, I guess I'm really sorry about that, Clark, Jenny continued. Jenny never mentioned the few times Tracy and George met after the main novel ended at the Anderson Lake house. I wondered if they had told her about it. I didn't bother to inquire, but I figured George must be a great lawyer because Jenny was almost apologizing for George having an affair instead of being upset with him. Unfortunately for Tracy, I'm not as settled as Jenny and not as enthralled by her oratory, so I wasn't willing to give Tracy and George a pass like Jenny, even if their romance had been going on for 20 years. I thought to myself, I just think back to what my life would be like if I left him and how things would be different for me and the girls, she continued. They say you should always think about whether your life would be better or worse if you left your spouse, and I know mine would be worse. Thank you for sharing this with me, Jenny. It's definitely food for thought. I'll definitely have to consider it, though there are several factors for that, including the fact that unlike you, I wasn't told about the affair. I found out about it completely by accident. Tracy knew it was wrong when she did it and knew what my reaction would be, so she decided it would be better for everyone if I never found out and just lived in ignorance. And that would have been the case if it hadn't been for the test. And now, 20 years later, I find out that the center of my world loved another man and had an intimate relationship with him and then turned out to be a saint and dumped him for his career, defaulting back to me. Right, Tracy? My wife didn't say anything during Jenny's story. She just sat quietly while Jenny told her story, all the while she was furtively glancing in my direction, trying to gauge my reaction. She didn't know that I knew about her observation, so I sat nonchalantly while Jenny talked, just to piss Tracy off a little. My reaction to Jenny's story wasn't what Tracy would have liked, and neither was Jenny's. They looked at each other with pain in their eyes. I shook my head, went into the kitchen, poured myself another glass of wine, returned to the family room, and turned on the big screen, signaling to both of them that the conversation was over for the day. The women took the hint and moved into the living room, where I could hear their quiet conversation. When whatever I was watching was finished, I turned off the TV, poked my head into the living room, said good night, and headed up the stairs to our bedroom. Jenny cornered me in the family room on Saturday and said we needed to talk. I had no idea where Tracy was, but agreed, and we retreated to the formal living room and sat in 2 chairs in the corner. Clark, I understand your pain, I really do, but not forgiving Tracy and divorcing her would be a terrible mistake for both of you, Jenny began. You love her, and she loves you. That should be all that matters. The rest is history, and for the two of you to spend the rest of your lives apart because of something that happened 20 years ago would be horrible. If I can forgive George, surely you can forgive Tracy too. Honestly, I don't know if I can, Jean. Like I said yesterday, I wasn't told about the affair, but you were. I wasn't told because she knew it was wrong, and I wouldn't have forgiven her. Then why should I forgive her now? She cheated on me for 20 years, she had an affair for a few years, and she cheated on me for another 20 years. How can I forgive her? How can I trust her again? I shook my head, stood up, and left the room, passing Tracy in the hallway. She was well aware of what I just discussed with Jenny, and she could see from the look on my face that I wouldn't budge an inch. Dinner on Saturday night was very quiet. The women tried to make small talk, but I wasn't interested. I didn't say 3 words during the entire dinner. After a quick thank you, I grabbed my jacket and headed out, telling the couple I'd be at Malone's, my favorite place to have a quiet drink. When I arrived at Malone's, Ronnie, the woman who owned the bar, was chatting with other customers in the far corner. Instead of taking a seat at the bar as I usually do when I walk into a restaurant, I sat at a table by myself, feeling miserable and by all accounts looking even worse. Marn, the bartender, came over with my usual Crown Black on the rocks and made the remark that I looked like my dog had just died. Sort of, but nothing as important as my dog, just my marriage, I giggled unconvincingly. Marn walked over to Ronnie and whispered something in her ear. Ronnie moved away from the customers to the far end and came over to me, sitting across from me at the table. "Okay, Superman, spill it," she said. Ronnie was about my age, a largish woman of Irish descent with freckles and red hair that she wore like a badge. She didn't put up with crap from anyone, but in case someone did get rude to her, her husband Moose cooked meals in the back room. Moose was 6'3" and weighed 280 and was a former Marine sergeant. The Malone was not a rough place, but things got out of hand at the bar sometimes. I only saw it once. The offending man had sassed Ronnie, and when she sassed him back, he didn't have the sense to shut his mouth. Moose hit him with one punch and then pinned the dumbass to the floor with his foot until the cops arrived to clean up the mess. Ronnie called me Superman because of my name. She said it reminded her of Clark Kent and swore to everyone that even though I was a nice guy with a good job, she didn't want to see me angry. We always had a good laugh about it. I've been coming to Malone's for 20 years, sometimes with Tracy, sometimes without, sometimes to eat, sometimes just to drink. Ronnie and Moose got to know both Tracy and me well, and she could read people, including me, pretty well. She was like the sister I never had. "Tracy and I are done," I began. I hadn't told anyone anything up until that point, and admittedly, it felt good to finally talk it out. I found out she cheated on me with her boss about 20 years ago. Not once, not a few times, but for 4 whole goddamn years. Marissa is his, and she thinks that because it was so long ago and I didn't know about it when it was happening, I should just accept it and move on. She says she loves me, always has, and she doesn't want to divorce me. "That little cheating!" exclaimed Ronnie. "How dare she? You're not just going to take it and let her stay, are you? If that happened to me and Moose, he'd have my ass up against the wall and the guy's head up next to it." It was good to hear that Ronnie agreed with me. I really appreciated her sensible, unbiased view of things, and if she thought otherwise, it would definitely make me reconsider my position. "Look, Superman, it's a matter of respect as much as anything else. I love Tracy, I love Tracy, but her deception was not done out of love and certainly not out of respect. How could she let you think of someone else's child as your own all these years?" I explained Marissa's situation to Ronnie, noting that she didn't know for sure, but Ronnie was reluctant to do so, noting that refusing to test the baby was a convenient way of saying she didn't want to know. "Did she ever apologize for cheating or just apologize for hurting you?" Damn it, that woman was good. She never apologized for cheating. I don't even think she ever apologized for hurting me. I think the only thing she really apologized for was for what I found out, I said. "I can't tell you what to do, Superman, but I think she's already told you what you need to do." "I'm sorry, Clark." Tonight's Corona is on me and Moose. The remaining bottle is yours, and we'll call you a cab at the end of the night. Give me your keys." I did as I was told. The cab driver delivered me to my house around 2 in the morning. Tracy met us at the door and helped guide me up the stairs to our bedroom. I fell into bed fully dressed. Tracy took off my shoes and socks, and that's how I slept. Late Wednesday night, I got a call from my son at the office. He wanted to talk to me about the situation with Tracy. He didn't say so, but apparently, Tracy had decided she needed to bring in the heavy lifting, the kids, to talk me out of the divorce. My son and I are usually on the same page on most issues, but from talking to him, I realized that Tracy had put a lot of effort into this, and it had paid off because he definitely saw her side of the divorce story. "Dad, divorcing Mom would be the dumbest thing you've done since you wore a leisure suit in the 70s, he tried to joke with me, seriously. "Dad, divorce for something she did 20 years ago that you only found out about a few weeks ago? Just a few weeks ago you said you loved her and wanted to spend the rest of your life with her, and now you're ready to throw it all away and maybe live the rest of your life alone because of a mistake. Really, Dad?" First of all, Barry, a mistake would be what she did the first few times she had sex with him. After a few months, it's already a decision, not a mistake. What would you do if you found out Linda was cheating on you? Probably rip her head off, but you didn't catch her. It's been over for 20 years, the physical act was over, but the deception, the lack of respect, continued, I replied coldly. Barry, I thought you were smart enough not to get involved and take sides, but you've stepped in where no child should step in. You've come between your parents, and for what, Barry? I'm not going to change my mind. I'm the injured party here, and you're pissing me off. I put that woman on a pedestal, I idolized her, and she knew it. She was never going to tell me that, and if it hadn't been for the accident, I would have gone to my grave worshipping her, and she just used me as a second choice when the man she loved the most didn't want to marry her. Do I feel used, son? I sure do. Dad, aren't you being overdramatic? I think he was still talking when I hung up. When I walked in the door around 6 o'clock in the evening, Tracy was already preparing a delicious meal. She didn't look happy when I told her I wasn't hungry. I poured some Jack into a glass, turned on the TV, and sat down in my favorite chair. She walked in and asked what was wrong. Same different day. My wife cheats on me for 4 years, has a kid with another guy, and now my kids are telling me I'm the bad guy here. Do me a favor, call Kathy tonight and tell her not to call me tomorrow if she doesn't want to be hung up on like Barry, I said. Tracy lowered her eyes. You'd think after 31 years she'd know not to piss me off on her behalf. What makes you think the divorce won't go through? I said, raising my voice. Not only did you cheat on me for 4 years with another man and have a child with him, but you replaced me in your heart with him. You can sit here and tell me that you weren't in love with him and that if he had asked you to divorce me and marry him, you wouldn't have done it. And here's the thing, you may love me, but you're not in love with me. You're in love with him. I'm just a solid backup plan because you've always known that my heart belongs to you and I'd do anything for you just to have you as mine. You cheated on me, you lied to me, you disrespected me, and now you have the nerve to try to turn our children against me. That was the last straw, Tracy. But no, I won't be cruel to you, and especially not to Jenny, and I won't ruin George's wonderful career as a clean-cut judge. I'll file a statement of irreconcilable differences, and we can each keep our retirement accounts and split the house and everything else in half. The tears rolled down Tracy's cheeks, fast and furious, and as she rose from her chair, I threw another thing at her. You never told me you regretted cheating. Probably because you don't regret it, which is, at least, honest. I spent the rest of the night cuddled up with a bottle of Jack. The next day, I called my attorney and told her she needed to get the divorce papers ready as soon as possible. She said I could review them the following Tuesday. She would have them ready on Wednesday, and Tracy could be served on Thursday. I told her to bring her server to my house Friday night. I wanted to be there when she was served. I then called Judge George Anderson's office and told his receptionist that I needed him to call me back on an important matter. He knew exactly why I was calling, and I knew he would call me back as soon as possible. George looked a little worried when he called me back about 2 hours later. Yes, he knew exactly why I was calling, although he didn't think he wanted to do it in his office. I agreed completely and told him I'd be at his house the following Saturday at 10 a.m. He didn't know that Tracy wouldn't be serviced the night before, although I'm sure by the time I made the 2-hour drive to his luxurious home, he would already know that. Over dinner at Malone's on Saturday night, Tracy confided that Jenny had called her and told her about my meeting with George the following Saturday. She wanted to know if I wanted to accompany her on the trip. "This isn't small talk, Tracy," I said. "George and I have something to discuss, and you don't have to be present for it. You should remember that he's an appellate court judge with an excellent reputation who might even be shortlisted for a Supreme Court judgeship. If you do any machista stuff with him, you could get arrested. And besides, you promised me you wouldn't do anything to hurt his career." "That's right, you'll prefer him to me again, but don't worry, I intend to keep my promise. I won't do anything that might get him dropped from the short list of Supreme Court justices. God forbid, the show must go on." After telling the old man in the office what was going on in my life, I took a couple of personal hours and met with my attorney to go over the divorce papers. I gave her the okay. As I was about to leave, she asked if I had any plans for Judge George. "Why would you worry about that?" I asked, winking at her. "Because I'm still handling some criminal cases, and I thought you might need a good lawyer. You engineers don't seem to get too emotional about a lot of things, but I know you're pretty tight-lipped, and your methodical approach to things scares me." She handed me her business card, and I walked out of the office. For the next 3 days, time flew by quickly. We had a big project going on in the office, and it allowed me to focus on something other than my life. The old man even told me he was amazed at how focused I was despite all the turmoil in my life. I told him I was glad that at least something was going right. But on Friday night before I left, I told him about Tracy being sued and me facing George, and warned him that if things went wrong, I could be in jail on Monday. He assured me he'd have my back and my bail money. We parted with a handshake. I came home to yet another wonderful smelling meal that Tracy was cooking. Lately, she had been going out of her way to try to get me to pay attention to her many skills. She really was a wonderful cook. I almost felt guilty because I knew what was coming. After dinner, we ate mostly in silence, as we had for the past few weeks, though I didn't fail to tell her how wonderful the meal was. After all, I'm not an ungrateful bastard. Then I helped her put the dishes away, but just as we were about to head to the family room for an evening of television, the doorbell rang. It was almost 7. At once, I knew it wasn't for me, so I didn't move to take it. Tracy threw me a cheerful look, then walked to the door and opened it. Standing on the porch was a well-dressed young man who asked Tracy if she was Tracy Walters. When she answered in the affirmative, he handed her a manila envelope, said, "You have been served," turned on his heel, and walked away. Tracy didn't move from her seat, but from the way she shrugged, I knew she was crying. I walked past her, closed the front door, and took her by the shoulders, leading her to the kitchen table. She looked completely shaken, even though I told her she would be. We sat in silence for what seemed like an eternity, but in fact, no more than 5 minutes had passed. Finally, she muttered, "You bastard," and ran upstairs to our bedroom. I didn't follow her. The hard part was done. On one of the few occasions since we'd been married, I didn't sleep in the same bed as Tracy that night. I went to the bedroom we'd set up as a guest bedroom and slept there, though to call it sleep would be generous. I had broken up with the woman I had considered, until a few weeks ago, to be the light of my life, my soulmate, my everything. Despite everything that had happened, we were still sleeping in the same bed. I guess neither of us wanted to make a move on her, but now it was over, at least in my mind. I got up, took a shower, and when it was time to get dressed, I very quietly made my way to the bedroom and got everything I needed, trying my hardest not to wake Tracy and start something. I didn't bother to see if she was asleep, I just grabbed my clothes and left. I dressed as usual, a collared shirt, decent Levi's jeans, and the metal-tipped cowboy boots I had custom-made when we visited our son at his home in Dallas. I left a little earlier than I really needed to. I didn't want to be late for the meeting. If I got there early, I could always kill time at the cafe, which I did. I stood on the porch of George and Jenny's house at 10 sharp and rang the bell. Jenny, looking lovely as always but very nervous, opened the door. "I'm sorry it ended this way," was all I could say as she leaned over to hug me. She didn't say anything back. She took my hand and led me into the room where George had arranged all of his memorabilia and pictures around the room. George was sitting in his favorite chair, but when we walked in, he stood in front of the chair. "Hey, Clark, hey, George," Jenny looked very scared as she left the room. We stood about 6 feet apart and looked at each other. I had once considered this man almost an older brother, so close we were. George was 2 years older than me, about the same height, but the soft life of the last 20 years had added about 30 more pounds, about 20 on his round belly. We shared hopes and dreams with each other, had fun together, fished together, hunted together. Together, I was proud to call him my friend and proud of where his career as a judge had taken him. Now, standing in front of me and appraising me with his gaze, he was no longer a friend, but an enemy, the man who had stolen my wife's love, impregnated her with his child, and ruined my life. Suddenly, I was seized with rage. "You get to keep my wife's heart, you bastard!" I yelled at him. "You also get to keep your squeaky image because I promised Tracy I wouldn't tell anyone about this, and I don't break promises to that woman. But you won't keep your balls." At this point, I took a long, quick step forward with my left foot and then planted my right foot and drove it forward and upward, aiming for a 50-yard goal, the target of which was his aforementioned testicles. George reacted even slower than I had anticipated, and my metal-tipped boot hit the target accurately and precisely. I felt his balls clench as I thrust my foot as high as I could, and then heard him yelp like a wounded animal. He collapsed to the floor, holding his gonads with his hands and squealing like a hunted pig. At that moment, Jenny ran into the room, saw her husband on the floor, and rushed to him. He continued to scream in agony, and there was nothing she could do to calm him. She looked at me in fear. I pulled my cell phone out of my pocket and dialed 911. "There's been an accident at Judge George Anderson's house," I said. "We need an ambulance." I turned on my heels and headed for the door, but no sooner had I reached it than Jenny grabbed my right arm. I thought I was going to have to hit the woman, but instead of hysteria and anger, there was a calm expression on her face. She hugged me tightly and whispered, "Thank you. We know what we have to do." I hugged her back, walked out of the house, got in my car, and drove home, knowing the cops wouldn't come after me. Jenny understood and would explain it to her husband sometime in the future when he could think straight. The ride home brought me relief, or maybe it was a kick in the balls, I don't know. But after months of daily heartbreak, I felt free. Funny thing is, once I finally realized Tracy's betrayal, her grip on my heart loosened, and I was able to think clearly enough to do what was right for me. It may not have been right for everyone, but sometimes you just have to take care of yourself. That's what everyone else has done for the past 20 years, so why shouldn't I do the same? Yes, I knew that some part of me would always love Tracy, but I wasn't going to waste any more time rehashing this novel. It wasn't my fault, and it wasn't my choice. It was time to move on. When I got home, I went down to the basement, grabbed a couple of suitcases, and headed for our bedroom. I passed Tracy sitting in the family room, and she followed me into the bedroom. "So, that's it, then?" she asked. "That's it. 31 years old and out the door, Tracy. I'm sorry you're so wrapped up in yourself that you can't see how you deceived me, how you stole 24 years of my love with your deception. You can't see that, and you probably never will. But I've gotten over it, and I don't hate you. I don't even hate George, though that poor bastard probably thinks I do now. I'll reconcile with Barry and Kathy sometime in the future. You should make up with Marissa as soon as possible. Poor girl's a mess. Sign the papers, Tracy, and let's get this business over with." I'll have the rest of my stuff out of here in the next few days. I don't think we need to talk anymore. If you have anything to say to me. I put my lawyer's business card on the kitchen table. She stood there in shock, tears in her eyes, but there were no words. I picked up the suitcases, went downstairs, and put them in the trunk of my car. I went back to the house, packed up my things, and left. 31 years, just like that. I lied. Apparently, George was able to save one of his testicles after all. It took major surgery and months of pain, but they were able to save one of his testicles. I found out about it from Marissa, who had been contacted by Jeannie looking for me. Jenny didn't have my phone number, and no one else in the family wanted to tell me. In fact, no one else in the family is still talking to me now, 8 months later. But I've made my peace with it. According to the official story, Judge George fell on the corner of his ornate office desk, hit himself hard, and then did it again, falling to the floor. The press called it a domestic accident to be sensitive and did not report that the blow came to the genital area. He got a lot of sympathetic press. I guess that won't stop him from getting on the Supreme Court shortlist. Tracy signed the divorce papers within a week, and the divorce was finalized last week. The house will be auctioned off. Tracy hasn't tried to call me since I left. Barry and Kathy haven't called either. It looked like I wasn't going to be invited to the family Christmas dinner, wherever it was being held. The old man is handing over the company to me from the new year, as he himself is retiring. Under the terms of the deal, I have to run the company for 7 years before I can retire a rich man with a very golden parachute. Then he'll find someone to buy the company, and I'll get 10% of that deal too. I started going out and dating after being married forever. It would take me a while to remember exactly how to do that. However, word of the divorce spread quickly, and several of our divorced friends called and inquired about my interest. Moreover, 2 or 3 of Tracy's divorced friends called too, expressing their surprise that she could let me go at all. I have to admit it felt good for my ego. I have a good life ahead of me with challenges both professionally and personally. I am working on finding new hobbies in my spare time away from my personal endeavors. One hobby I have given up is genealogy. I used to do it. The story makes you reflect on fidelity, trust, and the value of family bonds, as well as on how people cope with such painful situations. Infidelity often goes beyond simple dramatic twists, reflecting deep psychological aspects of human nature and emotions.